World Cup came to America, and America stole the show. A shopping cart squeaks down a fluorescent-lit aisle. Inside it, chips, a few sports drinks, a box of cereal. The wheels catch slightly on the linoleum. Pushing it is an 18-year-old who cannot walk 50 feet through central Barcelona without being swallowed by a crowd. Here, in a Walmart in a small Georgia town most Americans couldn't find on a map, nobody turns their head. That's Lamine Yamal, Spain's brightest young star. The player half of Europe is already calling the future of the sport. And for one quiet afternoon, he's just another guy comparing snack prices. The World Cup came to North America this summer. Nobody quite prepared for how much of the story would end up happening off the pitch entirely. Start with the setup, because it explains everything that follows. For this tournament, every national team picked an American town to call home base for a month, and FIFA didn't exactly steer them toward the obvious cities. No glass towers in Manhattan. No red carpets in Los Angeles. Spain, one of the favorites to win the whole thing, set up camp in Chattanooga, Tennessee, training on the turf of a private high school. Picture that for a second. The most technically gifted national team on the planet, running drills where a group of American teenagers normally play their Friday night games. The town didn't quite know what to do with that. Fort Oglethorpe, the small community next door, spent weeks watching its sidewalks filled with people who'd flown in from 3 continents just to catch a glimpse of a training session. Millions tuned in online just to watch the team's charter plane land. A training session, not a match, a practice. And somewhere in the middle of that madness, an 18-year-old kid, Barcelona's Lamine Yamal, walked out of a Walmart holding a cart of essentials like he'd been doing his whole life. Because in some sense, this was his whole life now. No bodyguards clearing a path, no fans pressed against a car window, just fluorescent lights and a self-checkout line. Fans clipped it, of course, and it spread the way anything unexpected spreads. Not because it was dramatic, because it wasn't. That contrast, global icon, completely ordinary errand, turned out to be the whole tournament in miniature. Down the road in Chattanooga, a young boy climbed up onto a fence outside the team's training facility and stayed there for hours, holding a handwritten sign for Yamal and his teammate Pedri. Simple words. A thank you for coming to his city. A hope that they'd win it all. He wasn't alone. Thousands of locals had entered a lottery just for the chance to watch a closed practice session, treating it the way you'd treat tickets to a sold-out concert. A drill, cones on a field, and people lined up like it was a final. If Chattanooga adopted Spain, Raleigh, North Carolina did something even stranger than Norway. Erling Haaland, a man who terrifies opposing defenses for a living, who fills stadiums across England just by showing up, spent one of his free evenings before Norway's opening match sitting ringside as Stanley Cup final game. Hockey, a sport with no direct equivalent back home. The cameras found him on the big screen mid-celebration, laughing, waving a rally towel over his head like he'd grown up 2 rows from the ice. The home crowd ate it up. He looked, for 90 minutes, like just another fan who got lucky with tickets. Days later, he scored twice in his first match of the tournament. Somebody, somewhere, is convinced the hockey had something to do with it. Not every team arrived ready to embrace the strangeness, though. Norway's staff, in particular, seemed to trust very little about American groceries. Before the tournament even began, they shipped in their own food supply. Crates of salmon, wheels of Norwegian brown cheese, thousands of oranges, and a small team of chefs flown in specifically to cook for the players, one of whom had been feeding the national team since the 1990s. Somewhere in that decision is an entire philosophy. You can send us to a country with more restaurants per capita than almost anywhere on Earth, and we will still pack our own dinner. Switzerland's culture shock ran in a different direction entirely. Their training base near San Diego came with an unexpected briefing, not about tactics, but about wildlife. Rattlesnakes in the canyon just beyond the practice fields. For a country with no native venomous snakes of any kind, it was the kind of detail nobody thinks to prepare for until suddenly someone has to. And then there's the American captain, caught in his own version of the same story, just running in reverse. Christian Pulisic, who spends his club career in Italy, sat by a campfire outside the team hotel in the days before the opening match, and did the most unremarkable thing imaginable. He made a s'more. When an Italian reporter asked him about it later, he admitted it wasn't exactly the healthiest choice. But, in his words, this is America. Toasted marshmallow, a piece of chocolate, 2 graham crackers. The national team captain, in the most pressure-filled week of his career, reaching for the single most ordinary comfort food this country has to offer. Every one of these moments works because of the same quiet joke sitting underneath it. These are some of the most recognizable human beings alive, encountering things most Americans consider background noise. A grocery store, a hockey towel, a snake warning, a campfire snack. None of it belongs in a highlight reel, and all of it went semi-viral anyway, because there's something disarming about watching fame collide with completely mundane. But the story has one final twist, and it belongs to the one player who felt absolutely none of this culture shock. Lionel Messi arrived in Kansas City with Argentina's charter flight, nicknamed, fittingly, after the year the country won its first title, and walked off into a country he already calls home. He plays his club football in Miami now, while Yamal was discovering self-checkout lines and Haaland was learning the rules of a power play. Messi was essentially just going back to the office. No wide eyes, no novelty, just familiar streets, a familiar climate, a life he'd already built. Sit with that for a second. For almost everyone else in this tournament, America was a strange, funny, occasionally rattlesnake-infested discovery. For the greatest player of his generation, it was simply Tuesday that the sum of the whole world showed up expecting stadiums. There's no music, found a grocery announcement demanding it. It simply happens quietly every single game, because somewhere along the way it became something the community simply does for its children. European visitors who witness it for the first time often say the same thing afterward. They didn't expect to cry at a football game. And then there's Penn State, where more than 100,000 fans dress entirely in white for what's called a whiteout, transforming the stadium into a single, breathing mass of color and sound so overwhelming that broadcasters have compared the visual to a snowstorm rolling through the stands. What strikes Europeans most, though, isn't any single tradition. It's the accumulation. It's realizing that none of this is rented spectacle. No corporate halftime show, no manufactured pageantry designed for television. It's inherited, passed from parent to child, from professor to freshman, from one generation of a town to the next, until the university and the community become impossible to separate. By the fourth quarter, the visitors from Germany aren't confused anymore. They're standing, arms raised, singing a fight song they learned an hour earlier, surrounded by strangers who no longer feel like strangers. Later, waiting for their bus home, one of them will try to explain what happened that day to someone who wasn't there, and he'll struggle because the words will sound too small for what he felt. Because that's usually how it goes when you visit somewhere new. It's rarely the landmarks that surprise you the most, or the food, or the postcards you already knew you'd photograph. It's discovering that something a stranger considers a completely ordinary Saturday can leave you changed by the time the sun goes down, and realizing quietly that you'll never watch a football match of any kind the exact same way again.